Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. So here we are with Mackenzie Gover. Is it
Go there.
Gover? Yeah, Gover, who's going to be here with me to talk about gender differences between autistic boys and girls in terms of social experiences, diagnosis, and attitudes. And I thought that that would be nice to bring you on board. And I got to say, Mackenzie, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Ken. It's really a wonderful opportunity, and I love the topics that you're bringing into this. I think they're really important to look into, and I think from both of our perspectives, I think it's going to end up being a really interesting conversation.
Okay. So I guess to start us off, I guess one of the questions that I was thinking about was how come not a lot of girls on the spectrum aren't diagnosed as much as boys? I mean, is there any actual specific differences between how boys and girls are diagnosed? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's an excellent point to bring up. One of the things is in any condition, not just autism, if they don't have a wide enough sample on what they're researching, their information is going to be off and they're not going to be diagnosing people that should be diagnosed.
Hmm.
And you can see this not only in autism, there's many different conditions other than autism where women and men present in the conditions in different ways. Stuff like even cardiovascular disease, they have different symptoms. For like an oncoming heart attack, women experience something different than men. Don't quote me on anything. I can't remember the exact difference, but it does have like a wide array of differences, and people aren't aware of the way women present. So they're less likely to get medication for this illness, and they're more likely to die because they did not get treatment. Like that type of a thing happens all the time with mental conditions and physical conditions. And it's
Hmm.
definitely present in diagnosing those with autism because, like you just said, most studies are done on males and they conclude male presentation. And those are valid because that's the way males typically present. And it leaves women in a bit of a real hard place because I don't necessarily think that the people diagnosing this are like have a purpose bias against women. Some do. Some think it's a boy's disease.
Yeah.
Um, but they're being given information that's primarily on male presentation. So they're going to throw out those who are presenting with autism in women. They present a touch differently, but we do have common symptoms going on. There is different ways those express, present, and more typical interests and avenues that girls follow versus boys. And we don't have enough information on that to have like a definite criteria difference and what you should be looking at a female and what you should be looking at with a male. I think more studies, more awareness will definitely change that though.
Definitely. I think Australia or something like that, they changed their diagnosis like for criteria for girls to include camouflaging and masking. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's really hard to find autism in girls because a lot of them are kind of forgetting the masking part. And we see that, may say, we're looking at girls and we're looking at these list of our criteria we have to check off to mark them as autistic. None of them check off, and we're like, oh, they're normal, when maybe we should think about how we're diagnosing autism though, and perhaps maybe thinking that maybe there's other symptoms of autism that we're kind of missing out on because I guess you could say there's a little bias towards it, perhaps because like there's a bias that men got to be strong and athletic or outgoing and stuff. And so when you see someone that might be, let's say, lonely as a kid or doesn't really get active in sports like other guys are, it's probably more noticeable. I mean, I'm not sure if this is the right way to say it though, but for I guess girls, like people are like, oh, they like the same things that other girls too. They're normal and stuff. When perhaps maybe they seem like that because they're masking so much. They see that other girls act like that, so some girls might feel like, oh, I have to act like this in order to be accepted.
No, there's a lot of good points. offer my perspective. It's interesting. You're talking about masking being primarily a girl presentation, but guys who are autistic mask too. I actually think I remember talking to you about it. Um, when we were talking in the group at another point, you were talking about how draining it is to socialize, because I don't know about how what goes through your mind exactly, but masking is basically acting and very much controlling your internal response to and filtering it through something that you know will be socially accepted. And me personally, a lot of lists in my head going on what I'm supposed to do in certain social situations, a lot of things. Not a lot of my reactions are natural reactions. They're controlled, monitored, and calculated. And girls are not the only ones that do this, but their studies are leaning towards the idea they master it faster and
Hmm.
better than boys, which I don't know if is true or not. To be honest, I was not um, very good at masking in high school. I was horribly awkward. I didn't have a lot of I didn't have friends. I had acquaintances. I didn't spend time with anybody outside of school. I was very socially withdrawn. Um, all I did was read all day. This, if you looked at me in high school, and let's say instead I was a guy, I'm still presenting symptoms of autism that would have been more clear if I had been male. Because a guy reading all day, not talking to anybody the whole day, completely withdrawn from peers. A bit more obvious than a girl, unfortunately. And I can't tell how much of it is social acceptability of a shy girl who's socially withdrawn and not as confident socially, and how much of it is that. Because a lot of the people being studied and theories basing this off of are people that are older. Women are being diagnosed much later on. So how much of it is compensation? How much of it is this learned skill that we've had to compensate throughout life with, and we've made it up to this point? Because if you looked at me today versus looking at me in high school, and as a smaller child, I'm like, I check all the points in the DSM, like, and they're male presentations. So it's really hard for me to tell how much is biased, how much is the data. We don't have enough of it to conclude that. And all mental diseases have an element of social and cultural that affect how somebody presents. If you look into male to female depression and what's typical of males that are depressed versus females that are depressed, you'll get a long list of different things. And the ratio is more women are depressed. But there are studies that theorize that men don't go for help as often. And it's like, it's a complicated issue. I've trailed off, but whether there are social expectations and social acceptance more of shy girls, I can't really tell, because I wasn't particularly socially involved as a child. I did not mask very well. I was reading a book all day, and I was behind a book, and I didn't socially interact with many people. And if I was, they were acquaintances. They were not somebody I hung out outside of a school setting in a classroom, specifically when the class was going. And even then, it was a little bit.
So like some
Like
social interaction, like how would you describe these kind of interactions you have with other people though? Like
they were
small.
facilitated.
Okay.
So I had very little voluntarily I sought out social interaction. Definitely do more now as an adult. Part of it was a definite confidence thing going on. I had a long series. I had more. So I actually remember a study that you put in here that was talking about mainstream um, integrating people in special ed into mainstream schooling. And I'm like, I related a lot to some of the things they were saying in there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the environment was overwhelming, and it wasn't uh, so overwhelming that even if I had an urge to interact with the other kids, I was too stressed to do it well.
Yeah.
um,
I see.
yeah.
I got it. Yeah, because part of the reason why I brought that up earlier was because that was kind of my experience when I was in special ed. Like when I was diagnosed as a kid, I was like, I think they called it mild autism, and so they thought, okay, so you're autistic, but you can learn. And so I was at a point where I just learned so fast that not even special ed classes could keep up with me. And so what they did was they put me in mainstream because they're like, oh, you seem ready. Why not we put you in a class of regular kids? Let's see how well you do so you can integrate. Because one of their goals is they wanted me to integrate me into a regular classroom setting where I'll be with learning just like every other student. I will learn well as other students. But it was actually a lot harder, and some of the things that you brought up, I actually felt like one of the biggest barriers was because not a lot of teachers are trained how to deal with autistic kids. Because we're special ed teachers, like they already know what they have to do to work with autistic kids. But then a regular teacher is like double the pressure. Because in a regular classroom, you know, kids don't really get special attention. You know, it's usually just a teacher on a lecture board, just kind of teaching in general, and then they kind of expect, you know, the students to just kind of take care of themselves a little bit. And then kids sometimes, you know, they go into cliques, they form their own exclusive groups, and then for me as a kid, I didn't understand that. Like there are times where I would try to talk to people and they just wouldn't talk to me. I don't know why. Um, and so sometimes I'll be alone, just not knowing. Apparently, there's like a hidden language to how to get along in a group or something like that. Like sometimes I might say things that might offend people, and I don't know why. And then sometimes kids, you know, they would pick on me, like, and I wouldn't know why they're picking on me or something like that. And so like it really brings up like, and so that study just helps kind of really illustrate how complex it is to integrate people, because it's not just throwing people into a regular classroom. There's also the social part too that people are kind of missing out. And I mean, I guess it's possible for it to work, but it requires a lot of just figuring out how do you deal with the social part. Like, how do you make sure that, you know, that person feels comfortable around other people? Those people are treating that person with respect and understanding, you know, where that person's coming from and things like that. So I guess it could work, but it requires a lot of that social part to really make it work. Yeah, I feel like that's
Yeah,
missing out.
I definitely can understand the I had very similar experiences. So I wasn't in any special ed classes. I was in mainstream the whole time.
Hmm.
And I, the integration experience, I feel like part of it is, I've noticed like in the study, it concluded we're kind of okay during elementary school. And as social interaction becomes more complicated, the gap between peers and mainstream and all that becomes a lot more difficult to understand and deal with. And I feel like I definitely experienced that somewhere around middle school. I would say suddenly things got enormously more complicated, and it felt like it was so fast too.
Yeah.
I feel like part of it might have been that I was already behind socially and no one recognized it because no one asked questions quite like, hey, do you know what a friend is? That's
Mm-hmm.
not something anybody asked me as a child, all from grade school to high school. But looking back in hindsight, I didn't know what a good friend looked like or a friend. I mistook acquaintances for friends, and I didn't quite understand that people hung out outside of facilitated areas, and that was more of a definition of a friend than the brief moments I was hanging out with these people. And I didn't have a clique or anything either, or regular people that I like beyond like you sit next to me and that type of thing. I definitely think, actually, interestingly enough, remember in my high school experience that I think that my school was doing a program, like you were saying, that encouraging some people that are high functioning autistics
Mm-hmm.
integrated into regular classes. And to be honest, it may have made me want to mask more uh, after seeing, because take into account that I did have a brother that was autistic. And while nobody explained to me what that meant, I associated all of his behaviors with autism and the way my brother was. And I saw this, I'm going to say student A because I don't want to give out any details of this incident beyond. So student A went into my health class and he was autistic. I look back and realize I knew he was autistic and nobody told me. And think of that might have been a clue for my own self.
Yeah.
He acted like my brother, despite the fact he could have conversations back and forth. He could do all that, but he was stressed out, extremely stressed out, and the teacher didn't know what to do. And I was like, I'll sit next to him and everything. It's honestly one of the worst classes experiences that I have ever had, even my own stress, because the kids treated him really badly. And I had my own experiences with my peers not treating me very nicely, but full on laughing when he was having meltdowns and leaving the classroom because he was upset. And just from my own experience with that, I'm like, we got to do this in a better, more accommodating way, because this is humiliating for this kid,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
no child wants to cry in front of their peers and run out of the classroom and
Right.
experience the laughing and horrible behavior of their peers. Teacher didn't
Right.
know how to dress this, that type of thing. I'm sharing
Mm-hmm.
this story because this is what it can look like, integrating special ed kids into mainstream classrooms
Mm-hmm.
and not going over with the teacher things that the child needs to excel in this environment and that type of thing. It can be very, as I read in the study and as own personal experience with being in these classrooms and seeing somebody else in these classrooms, there needs to be more done to make this experience a positive one rather than a traumatizing one, because that situation that I just explained to you, that's a horrible experience.
Definitely. I have to admit, I kind of suffered, some of the problems too, like going to mainstream classes and just regular classes. Because even though it seemed like on the outside I was normal, internally though I just felt like really insecure. Like there are times where like I just wanted to talk to people because I was just going through a lot of trauma that had to do with bullying and whatnot. And then most of the people around just didn't seem like the people that would be open to that though, because or sometimes they would just tell me, big boys don't cry. Like one of the things that really ticked me off was when there was like a teacher that I was talking to that I was trying to explain that I did not fit in well with these regular classrooms. I just really upset that I'm not doing well in this environment, and that things on the playground don't turn out the way I expect it to. Kids would pick on me. They would make up the rules as they go just to, on purpose, try to get me to not play the game. Like I'll be playing baseball or something, or like football, and then they'll make up a stupid rule so that way I can get tagged out or something of the game or something like that. And and then I remember the teacher's like, "Big boys don't cry," and I remember feeling a little annoyed by that, because does that mean like it's okay to not feel? And then and not to mention adding in the bullying and all that, it just made it feel like that it's not okay for me to feel. And so for all these years, like I was really hesitant about talking to people because I was just worried that people don't like my honesty. Because apparently, it seemed like people wanted me to, I guess maybe it's just the male thing, or like just the idea of just being always tough and strong and not being weak. And there's this, I don't know if you heard, but there's this wonderful book that talks about it, though. There's a book called, hold on, let me pull it out. One second. So there's this wonderful book that my psychologist recommended that talks a lot about why we're experiencing all of these emotional problems. And it doesn't have to do with autism. It has to do with the way we communicate with each other and how we understand each other. And it's this
Oh, is it
permission to
the
feel.
Permission to Feel? I will
Yeah.
definitely have to read this book, but I also, since you brought that up, I was like, have you heard of the double empathy study that where they were testing communications and empathy between autistic people, specifically between autistic people and their ability to communicate with other autistic people
Mm-hmm.
versus people that aren't autistic, and then seeing the level of communication between somebody who's autistic and not autistic, and they found
Mm-hmm.
like really interesting findings.
Okay, might look at this. Okay, because I think it's really
But
interesting, though.
I'm
Like it has to do with the way we as a society are communicating with each other, and about how we're not letting people have feelings. Like it's beyond autism, it's beyond this and this and that. It's about society. Because you see it often, like in the classroom. A teacher sees a kid act out. Their first instinct is to be like, "Hey, shut up, or I'm going to send you to the principal's office. Don't have feelings," or something like that. Like you might see this in elementary schools a lot. You know what I mean?
It's very
Yeah.
interesting that you bring this up. I think I was talking to my sister about something about this. We're very parenting styles. We're very quick to punish before we ask for, hey, why are you doing that?
Like what's causing it? Not what are you doing, but what caused you to feel this way? Like we're not asking that question. That's what this book talks about. Like we're not asking enough questions about what caused you to feel this way. We're just focusing on the behavior, not what causes it.
I think it's very interesting because it delves, at least what you're telling me so far, it kind of delves into ABA like topics where the entire design is based upon punishment, rewards, and positive and negative reinforcement, which
Mm-hmm.
is sometimes necessary in parenting, but in a very different way than ABA implements it. And you can definitely tell that if you don't, part of the problem with the punishment immediately thing is kids' needs are going to be unmet in that situation and unaddressed, which is a big problem because no child knows what they need and how to address their needs in appropriate and ways and in healthy ways until you teach them. Like I'm thinking like basic things like a child throwing a tantrum because they're hungry and they don't know how to address that need, and they don't know, hey, I got to tell somebody I'm hungry and then I need to go eat something. Like that's a really basic example, but
Mm-hmm.
children need to be taught that, and
Yeah.
their needs to be addressed and be taught, hey, we can do this to meet your needs, and this whole conversation and whole situation will go better if we address your needs and meet them, even if it's you are in trouble still for whatever
Right.
you did.
One thing I've noticed is that like as a kid, like you're still learning, you're still growing, so you don't know a lot of words yet. So when you're experiencing something, sometimes you might not have the words to describe what you're feeling, and so it makes a lot of miscommunication problems. Because I've seen cases where like for instance, I'll give you an example. Like my sister, she's bipolar. She's not autistic. She has bipolar. And one of the reasons why it took so long for her to get that diagnosis was because she didn't have the words to describe what she was feeling. Like I guess it was one day she wasn't feeling well, and then I don't know, she just had feelings, and then she didn't know how to explain it. And the teacher noticed and sent her to the psychologist's office. And then the psychologist asked questions, and she was like, "I'm okay." And she didn't mean okay as in she's feeling all right. She said okay because she didn't know how to describe, what she was going through. And I feel that's kind of the case here. Like you're saying about how like sometimes children, they know what they want, but they don't quite, they're still learning how to describe it, which leads to a lot of miscommunication. Which is why you might have cases where parents are like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Some people panic or they use the wrong method to address that problem.
Is really interesting because I'm like, I think I just did a video yesterday on like sensory needs and autism and things like that. This particular conversation, I'm like, is really important because I'm like, autistic people do need different things than the average kid, but they're still kids.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not necessarily going to be able to communicate that need as a child. So I definitely wouldn't have been able to communicate some of my sensory needs when I was a kid. I needed like words that I could use, and I needed to be taught like, hey, how are you feeling right now? I need somebody to check in with me and why I was so upset in the moment, and like find out a way to calm down.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely an element of not being given the words, and certain situations like your sister where they're bipolar. How often do you hear people talk about how people are bipolar and how they
Mm-hmm.
feel and how
Yeah.
that feels? Before I specifically sought out a diagnosis for autism because I was having problems and I didn't know why I was feeling the way I was feeling, and I was having what I now know was burnout after the coronavirus lockdown. And I was now can say in hindsight, I know why I was so upset. I no longer had any alone time. I was constantly around people, and I didn't realize that I needed alone time away from noise, away from people in order to function in life. It didn't occur to me that this was a need and that I needed that until I expressed those needs in a very unacceptable way by having meltdowns and shutdowns and not communicating very well. I ended up going to a therapist, and I am very interested in psychology. Uh, Super interested. That's why I listed it as one of my special interests. And I was like, there's something going on. And I'm very interested in the subject. So I'm going to start reading up and look for behaviors and conditions that sound like what I'm experiencing. And I'm specifically looking for articles of people with the condition speaking, because those are really important and people don't emphasize that enough. And I go over these, and I know why, after going over those, that people that do psychological evaluations for this type of thing end up diagnosing girls with different conditions, because outwardly our behavior does look like some of these, but you have to ask why we're doing these things. Why? Because that was the problem with all of these things that I was looking up. I was like, I looked at these and why people are doing them and people explaining it. And I'm like, no, this is not why I'm doing this. This doesn't make sense to me. This may look outwardly like my behavior, and an outsider would look like that, but I have the internally, I can say, no, this is not what's going in my mind right now. It wasn't until a push from my sister and an article I was reading about a girl with autism and her explaining her experience that I was like, oh, this sounds like me. This is what I feel like. This is why I'm doing these things. That's what pointed me in the direction of autism and seeking a diagnosis for that. And I'm really glad I did come across it and my sister did push for it, because I would have been diagnosed with something different. I would have. And I wouldn't have been able to address the needs that are like sensory and social in the way that would actually help me if I had been diagnosed with depression, anxiety, or any of these other frequently diagnosed things that girls get diagnosed with. And that wouldn't have met my needs and what I actually needed in a good way. And I veered very off topic.
Okay.
This addressing needs is really hard for kids. They don't have the words, and I definitely would not have explained things very well as a child. If somebody was asking me directly about behavior, and I was a literal kid, I definitely fall on that end of taking things very literally. If somebody was asking me if I was okay, how I would interpret it is, are you feeling the same way you usually feel?
That's a little, that can be vague.
that question, is there anything wrong? Is there anything going on? Is there anything different lately? Those all kind of ask, has something changed? No, I still feel the way I usually feel. So it must be okay, right? Yeah, that's
it's all on the surface.
You gotta ask different questions than that, especially with like kids.
It's something that requires a lot of really specific conversation, to really get down to the point, though. Because it reminds me of something. I remember I was talking to a couple of people I've met who are autistic, and they told me about how, I guess, like, what would help better is if they had parents that were more emotionally involved, which would allow for more of these conversations to come easier, though. Because, like, I have a couple guy friends who are autistic, or some ways like that. And one of the common themes I noticed was that one of the reasons why they have emotional challenges is because they all have to do with the neglectful parent or something like that. Like someone who's not emotionally there for them. Yeah, something like that. Like you might have a dad who's rich, buys you presents every Christmas, but that's kind of on the surface, because a present doesn't replace the kind of love you get from a father or something like that. So you might have someone who might be that kind of neglectful. Maybe not in a bad way, but just in a way that doesn't really affect the needs of the child, because
meeting all their basic needs, but
yeah,
not addressing emotional needs. Yes, I'm actually similar situation for myself and both parents, and I won't go too much into details.
All right, I understand.
It'll go off into a rant. Anyway, but yes, similar experience, and I get what you're totally talking about. Emotional unavailability from a parent, and an inability for them to express their emotions and address their needs, and open communication between the child and parent can lead to even more problems. Being able to express emotion and verbalize it specifically.
Definitely, though, because I think the way because kids are sort of like, they pick up from their parents, and so when you give them the experience to kind of express how you feel and stuff, they're more likely to get the skills they need to kind of figure out how to talk about it and stuff like that. Because otherwise, you come to a place where people have trouble just talking about how they're feeling. Because you know how when, let's say someone goes on the street and you ask, how are you feeling? Some people say, I'm fine. But sometimes people don't mean I'm fine as in they're okay. Sometimes we just say
No.
it, we just say it normally. Like it's just our natural answer because it's
It's
sort of like we're saying we're okay. I don't want people to worry about my business. I'm okay. I just want to be myself. Nothing is happening when there's
it's
probably.
interesting. It's mostly Americans that apparently do this too.
Oh,
I
really?
was reading something about like social, like it was complaining about Americans being like somehow they think "How are you" is high. It's just this. I actually asked my therapist about this and was like, "Why do people do this?" And supposedly it's like a social connection moment of, well, we're checking in with each other and feeling a moment of social connection. I'm like, I need way more than that to feel a social connection with anybody. That
I
type of
feel like we're
thing.
just reading a script at this point, just by the way we, because it's not the question, it's just the way people approach the question. It's like we just ask it because, well, we have to. Then actually, we want to know how the person's feeling.
I'm fully aware of it too. I'm like, I know I'm supposed to say this when I see you, and you answer the same way every time. I just know this is the way I'm supposed to greet you, and but I don't necessarily see the point of this ritual at
Yeah,
all.
definitely. I want to take it back to, I guess, something that I've noticed earlier. It's related to something that you talked about, has to do with, you may have seen this in study. It was something about the 4 o'clock explosion. I don't know. It's this idea that people have a certain period where like they're more likely to have outbursts. Yeah, like there's a certain period where people have an outburst or they don't, and the idea is kind of like boys outburst at school and they're okay at home, and then it's the vice versa for girls. But then sometimes I wonder, that depends on the environment they're in though, and how they're
Yeah,
masking, because it might be the case where someone might mask at home and then they don't mask at school, or someone masks at a certain place and some people don't at place, or it's very situational at school. Like some people mask sometimes at school, sometimes they don't. Yeah, so it's a kind of a very general thing. I mean, have you heard of it? I mean, what do you think?
I actually hadn't heard of it prior to you bringing up in the planning process. I found it very interesting because I honestly would like people to do more studies on whether or not this is true. Because
Yeah.
me personally, I'm like, I don't think I followed this rule at all. I just was really good at hiding it. I would, I know it was mentioned in your integration too. I wouldn't go to lunch to eat lunch. I would be hiding. I would be finding a quiet place for me to be alone because I couldn't take it anymore. In
Hmm.
hindsight, I was completely overwhelmed in my environment, and lunch was worse because people all around. There's so much noise, and I just wanted to be alone desperately. And also, my strategy for my calm down and upset moments was I need to go to the bathroom. Teacher, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I need
That's
to
a good
go.
excuse.
And I'd go and be upset in the bathroom.
Hmm.
uh, and have my meltdown. And I can't tell. This idea, I think, is we should put in the definite let's do more research category because it can lead to like potential stereotypes and
Hmm.
misinformation. But I definitely think one area might be like comfort. I am more likely to, when I'm not masking or when I'm comfortable not masking, I'm comfortable in my environment. I need to be like comfortable or I will be on edge, and the masking automatically comes on because it's like, oh, I'm not comfortable, and I need to do things in a certain way to make myself comfortable. I need to follow the rules and follow the rules for the social situation. I'm not comfortable enough to show anything that deviates from that because I'm deeply uncomfortable in this environment. It's overwhelming. I'm following a script because of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I do wonder, like, is this I'm comfortable at home? Is this actually like some type of actual presentation? Because I remember being upset quite a bit in the morning and at school, and like all freaking over the place as a child. So I'm like wondering and really want more research on that, because I
Exactly.
personally don't think I followed this rule. And again, I mentioned earlier that emotionally unavailable parents, I wasn't necessarily comfortable at home either. So
Right,
there was a
right.
lot of hiding in my room. Don't get me wrong, and that type of thing, and being alone, which played into, if I'm alone, I was definitely more comfortable, which I was left alone at home a lot.
Def
Like, this is where other factors, like, I'm thinking into it. I don't know if it's true, if what research and everything. It's an interesting proposal, though, and I would like to hear more about it.
Okay, that's valid though, because when I was thinking about it, I was like, it's a bit general though, because it depends on the environment though, where they're in, whether they're comfortable, whether they're okay being around people, or whether they could tolerate masking though. Because the 4 o'clock explosion, I mean, I feel a lot of it's just based on kind of gender bias though, like like and all of that though. Because some people, like you said, like you pointed out, some people may not be comfortable at home, and some people may not be comfortable at school either, or some people may not even be comfortable anywhere. So
Yeah.
it's so general. Like there needs to be like more look into it. Like is this like what is this idea behind 4 o'clock? And because it's not really making much sense a little bit.
Yeah, it's a bit arbitrary. That's the word
Yeah,
I'm looking for.
yeah. It's like cherry
And
picking certain
yeah,
points.
that's a lot of the issues I have with, like, the lack of research with girls. Is this how we actually present, or is this cherry picking information? We need, like, a much larger study, because I remember reading one of these in here, and it was like 25 girls, which is good. Don't get me wrong, but it's a study, but it's not a very large sample size,
Mm-hmm.
and any study suffers when it doesn't have a large sample size and doesn't have a lot of data to connect dots and connect patterns. I would just really like more, because when I look into some of the things they say about girls with autism, it doesn't match up with me, which makes me question whether or not it's actually true. Is this just a more typical female presentation, which is okay? I just deviated off the norm. Like I said, I checked all the boxes in the DSM for the male presentation, which means I was probably a bit obvious in hindsight. I didn't have girly interest even a little bit at all. Like I said, I was very often just reading books. I didn't understand dolls, and typical social interactions and social games that girls do at a young age. I didn't know what the hell was going on. They were very confusing for me. I didn't get it. I took a lot of things literally. So when they were proposing something to me, let's say game a house, I was like, let's say I get the dog roll, just random off the top of my head. I'm like, I'm not a dog though. I got confused.
Yeah.
I found girl games confusing. I almost more often than not went off with the boys and played soccer. Those poor boys that I was very rough with. I don't think any of them told the teacher how rough I was with them in hindsight. I was brutal in a game.
I don't know if I want to play a game with that kind of roughness.
Yeah, I look back at how I played the game of soccer, and when I was 6, and I was like, those poor boys. I was so ruthless. There was a lot of like, I'm gonna get the ball no matter what, and I'm gonna get in that goal. Like, it was just joining in that game. I didn't have a lot of friends in the game, but
Yeah.
I wanted to win. And this was an easy game for me to understand and grasp. Okay, I got to get the ball and I got to get it into goal over there. There's
Okay.
not much else than that.
You'll be good in a football team. We need that. You
Oh,
see a lot of football games. They're like
football's way
they're
too
like pounding
complicated
each
for
other,
me.
man. Like I feel like you fit right in.
I feel like I could get into it if I was actually playing, but I never take much interest in just sitting and watching sports. I'm like very confused by that activity. I'm like, I'm either in the game or I have no interest in it. And that type of
Okay.
thing. It's always hard for me to follow football. It's super complicated. Soccer was my preference and like games that I could like follow. But this brings up an interesting point that sometimes they say about autistic girls and some of the data that we tend to fit in well with our male peers to a certain point
Mm, mhm,
until later
mhm.
on. And I'm like, yes, I was definitely playing with the boys more often than not. Not necessarily socializing in depth, but boys don't socialize in depth the way the girls do at that age. They play games with each other, like you mentioned. They play
Mhm.
sports. It's a facilitated social interaction versus a game like House or a deep imaginary game where there's players and imagination going on the spot rules. It's not as in depth. You know all the rules because you played the game so often, you can memorize it and you can interact that way and blend in. Um, but, and then go into the mainstream study again, where they mentioned as grades go on, it becomes much more difficult to keep up. Um, that's part of it. Like I'm generalizing here. I got along with boys, but I've heard of many autistic girls that were like, no, I didn't experience that. Um, but I definitely experienced that, and I kept up with the guys socially up until a certain point, and then it dived off once middle school went around and it got more complicated.
Definitely.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the opposite for me too. Like I notice I tend to actually all the people I tend to get along with are girls. Interestingly enough, though, and I remember people like sometimes like I unintentionally make boys jealous because like they look at me like why is this guy so comfortable being on girls? Why do the girls want to talk to him? And it creates this jealousy streak with them because I don't know. I just find that I relate to girls more though. Ironically, I mean there are some boys who are the opposite though for sure, but I don't know. I just feel like I don't know. It's just men in general, and I don't want to generalize for men in general, but it's just that most of the men I met, they're just kind of I don't know, they just seem kind of closed off. You know what I mean? Like not very open-minded, not willing to express themselves so openly and things like that. And because there are times where people tell me, "You have a motherly side to you, Ken." Like, and I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but I guess this means I'm a nice person. So yeah.
I would say that actually I'm going to go over the social expectations for girls that you're mentioning, that it's more, it is expected and socially acceptable for girls to be nurturing, talking about their emotions, and this type of interaction is definitely more socially acceptable for girls versus guys. I've
Uh-huh.
seen, as I said, I got along with boys for a real long while, and I definitely relate to them a bit better guys wise. And I'm like, they don't talk about their emotions all the time, and
Yeah.
they're not. Uh, you're not required to be understanding necessarily and diplomatic and tactful in a conversation with
Yeah.
a guy versus girl relationships. Oh, yeah. You definitely need to be diplomatic and be very aware of how this friend is feeling, um, and check into it. And it's not always going to be direct, the way they send you signals. I didn't have a lot of girlfriends, still don't. I mostly, I think, am friends with my sister, and I think this is the
Mhm.
only long-term friend that's a girl that I've had, and we're close. And yeah, there's definitely a different expectation within a relationship between a friendship with a guy and a guy versus a girl and a girl. And I won't generalize too deeply, but there is like social acceptability, especially when you're kids. On at least from what I observe, guys are able to get away with saying socially inappropriate
Exactly.
things
Yeah, exactly.
versus
Oh
the
man,
way
locker room talk.
locker
Yeah.
room
Let-
talk. Yes, there's
I see.
definitely not the rough play that
I know
I
what
see
you
with guys going on. And not that I was particularly involved in that past elementary school, but I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
No, that's definitely a totally different social expectation for girls. I want to say it's not a generalization thing, but we have a different type of interaction going on when we do something that's considered socially not okay. There's a different reaction from girls, definitely. I don't want to necessarily say it's always negative, but it's not quite the oh, go ahead, yeah, do it that guys got going on. And as I said, not a generalization. It just tends to be like the majority going on. And it's interesting that you said you related to girls better because I'm like, huh, I wish I had more of that. I get along better now, honestly. Once I think more with autistic girls than I get along with non-autistic girls. Part of it is directness, definitely, and the way we interact. Like I get in this, like I said, I definitely filter things that come out of my mouth in social situations. There's a lesson need for that when I'm having a conversation, honestly, with any autistic person, because there's kind of, I don't know, less of a pressure to filter myself. And I don't know if I'm just being rude when I'm talking with them, but I'm like, I'm less inclined to go through that process of, oh, this is going to sound much nicer than the original thought, and I need to do it, say it this way in order to uh, save their feelings from my very blunt and ruthless thought. But I just, you know, those moments. I had
Yeah,
them so
I got
many
you.
as a kid. Oh
Yeah.
God.
Because one of the themes of I'm trying to bring out with this podcast is that, autism isn't just one experience. It's like a bunch of experiences.
Oh
And like
yeah.
one of the things that's important is to keep telling these stories, as we go, because just because someone meets one autistic person doesn't mean they know everybody in that group. Yeah. They may have an idea, but they got to keep learning as we go along.
Um, it's these types of experiences definitely need to be shared because I think it's not just girls that can go undiagnosed. It's the personality type that we kind of associate with autism and the stereotype of being super introverted and being kind of in our own worlds. I'm like, not quite the case. And not the only representation of autism. It's much wider than that because we tend to mask a little bit differently depending on the social group we're in. I definitely tend to do that because I tend to, whatever masking behavior or whatever type of behaviors I choose to exert in this environment and the script I chose was based on the people around me. I work as a waitress again still because I like to torture myself. God damn it, I didn't like talking to people, but I was gonna learn if I wanted to achieve that. So I got into customer service again. I'm going to start my own cookie business. So I'm still torturing myself that way. But there's a definite script that I created in that environment that had nothing to do with my own like personal thoughts or anything. Everything that I talk about at my work is a script. And only like a year into my job did I start diverging from the script I had created from those around me. I tend to mimic a lot of my boss's behavior because she was the one that trained me, and
Yeah.
this is where she likes stuff and everything. So that type of thing, I'm just putting it out there. The masking thing and everything is kind of different from situation to situation. I don't necessarily act the same, which is why girls, if they're masking better and this person is acting completely different from situation to situation, tends to lead to just misdiagnosis too.
Yeah, I think that's true because I think like I mean I think one of the things I think I've noticed is that there's a common theme that like sure there's some tendencies for girls to boys to act a certain way, but we shouldn't be relying just on that to diagnose autism because I think like with this whole girl boy thing, we might misdiagnose boys who exhibit the typical male behaviors when all that's just because of masking. So, and it's why like I brought up the whole Australia thing because they changed it to include camouflaging, masking, because I think they said that they believe that that's a real determiner. One of the real key symptoms of autism is the masking part. It's not about the gender thing. It's the masking and other
I think
things
that's
too. It's a really big deal. Like the masking is the most important part of all of that. It reminds me of something that I remember because to me that's like when it comes to social situations, like I think of myself as like a scientist. I have to actively study and trial and error in order to see what works, what doesn't. Because I remember a psychologist told me it's like you're thinking like a scientist. Because I look at other people and like, how do they do it like second nature? It's like they do it by habit. And then for me, I have to keep thinking about these rules constantly. Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that you mentioned that because you mentioned it in the outline too of the studying it like a science. And I'm like, I think that's a beautiful description of it because
Yeah.
I think some things to the effect when I was getting diagnosed that how did they explain it? They said you definitely having trouble with social interactions, but cognitively you're making up for it by your intellectually. Like you're having a process for this and compensating for this by intellectually trial and error, trying to figure out what's going on in this situation. Eventually, you come to the conclusion what you're supposed to do in this situation. But most people don't do that consciously for every social interaction. It's a combination of a processing going on and not quite being able to keep up socially unless I have a script, unless I have some type of well, how am I supposed to act in this situation, and like trial and error on a gigantic level.
Yeah.
I remember I called them failures as a kid, social failures, I guess. I thought of them as failures. I just wasn't doing particularly well in the social situation. But I knew that if I did something and eventually experimented a little and looked at what other people were doing in these situations and took on those behaviors and the way they did it, suddenly the situation got better. I couldn't deviate very well from the script, but the situation went better for me. And I say better as people weren't confused, people weren't surprised I said that, people weren't angry that I said that, and
Hmm.
that type of thing. A definite difference going on there and trail of thought and the way of processing social situations.
I think like part of life, like the way I'm going through now is just a lot of trial and error though. Because I think when it comes to friends, romance, all of that, I think that's something that is trial and error. And I guess the most important thing is honesty though. Like, because I'm going to make mistakes. I'm gonna mess up, But as long as I'm honest and the people I'm around with are honest and understand that, I can come to a place where at least the best thing I could do is to learn as much as I can so that I can be better at these things and hopefully, get more comfortable with them. And I think that's the best way to move forward. So I guess we're almost at the end of the time. Before we start finishing off, is there anything else that I left off or anything that you forgot to mention that you think would be important?
One last point, just one,
Yeah.
I swear. The interesting that you're talking about the trial and error and everything, and I'm like, I definitely personally, there was one kind of like leaning towards theory of special interest with girls, and this is really interesting because it did fall in line with my own experience, that we tend to have like more people-based special interests, which psychology is definitely a people-based special interest. And I can think of many people that I follow that they're talking about stuff that it's and you mentioned in the outline here that girls have a tendency to study it like a science, and that means not only doing trial and error, but actually studying things that have to do with people. And there are many books that go over social rules and social studies and how people react body language wise and this type of thing. Not only girls are obsessed with it, some autistic guys do this too.
It's like a psychologist.
A tendency to compile a lot of data because I noticed that Jennifer O'Toole mentions it in her book. We kind of like do pattern spotting, and I'm like, autistic people are very good at pattern spotting.
Yeah.
I will give her that. I'm like, yeah, we're gonna notice if it's something that we are interested in, that there's a pattern and there's something different about this information, and be really super absorbed in every little detail of it. Oh yeah, the expression of a special interest. That was what I was going into. It's at least for the girls, we like some of them said it tends to be more socially acceptable things. But the intensity, oh my God, I wish people would more catch on to this. I'm like, there's a difference between a teenage girl obsessed with this boy band. I'm going to give a real stereotypical thing versus this teenage girl knows every name that's connected to that boy band, knows every fact connected to that boy band. And this is where that special interest really shows. It's at least I still do it, and I notice that's the way I notice the special interest. It's when your way of showing that you like something is storing up these tremendous amount of facts on it. It's not just oh, I like this and I like to listen to this. It's oh, I know all this about this subject, and I keep on reading about it and it never gets old. And I could spend all day on this subject. And girls definitely express that. And it's a bit of a interesting how they like go over and debate that we have like less obvious interests. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's quite true from my experience. And I think on board, I think a more objective way of saying that is that most autistic people, the way they express they like things is different than the typical person. It's the amount of time and intensity we put into it, and it's definitely still present in autistic girls. I'm like, I personally just think it's the way people that are autistic express interest. I do it with people too. If I like you and I have known you for a while, I know a lot of things about you that I've kept cataloged in my head because I like you.
Well, Mackenzie, I want to say thank you guys. Thank you so much for coming to this podcast. One last thing. Where can people reach you online or on the internet and whatnot?
Well, I have a YouTube channel, as you said, called Autistic Musings, and it has all my links on all my videos. I actually think I haven't put it in the actual channel page about me, but click on any of my videos and it's listed below, and you can reach me on Facebook, just the name Mackenzie Gobert, and so is my Instagram, Mackenzie Gobert. It's only my YouTube channel that has a different name.
Okay, it's pretty good. I'll put the links down in the description. So if any of you guys are interested in checking her channel out, I'll put it down. So there you go. Mackenzie, I want to say thank you so much for coming on, and I hope you have a great day. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken, for inviting me. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Of course, I enjoyed it too. I enjoyed what we're talking about, and I would say I'm really grateful for the conversations we had. All right, end show. Hey, thank you guys so much for listening to my podcast. If you guys like this channel, check out, subscribe to it on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you guys get your podcasts. For social media, you can follow my Instagram account at the Autism Experience. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more from the Autism Experience.